Clara had always been the kind of person who put others first. As a nurse, she spent her days caring for patients, listening to their stories, and doing everything she could to make them comfortable. But despite her dedication, life hadn't been easy for her. She worked long hours at the hospital, often skipping meals just to save a little extra money. Her small apartment was modest, with peeling paint and second-hand furniture, but it was home. That morning, Clara walked into the hospital feeling tired, but ready to face the day. She loved her job. It gave her purpose. But lately, things had been tense. Rumors of budget cuts swirled through the halls, and many nurses feared they'd lose their positions. Still, Clara tried not to worry too much. Surely, they wouldn't let go of someone as experienced as her, right? Wrong. By noon, the news came. Clara was one of the staff members being laid off. Her heart sank as she packed up her belongings in a cardboard box. The manager apologized profusely, saying it wasn't personal. It was just business. But Clara didn't feel consoled. How would she pay rent? What about groceries or utilities? All those questions swirled in her mind as she left the hospital for what might be the last time. Walking home that evening, Clara felt defeated. For years, she'd given everything to help others, but now she didn't know how she'd help herself. Sitting alone in her dimly lit apartment, she stared at the pile of bills on her kitchen counter. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she wiped them away quickly. Crying wouldn't solve anything. "I'll figure it out," she whispered to herself. Somehow. But deep down, Clara wasn't so sure. ####2. A day like any other, word count. 500, ***. The next morning, Clara woke up feeling heavy, both physically and emotionally. She hadn't slept well, her mind racing with worries about the future. To distract herself, she decided to visit a small diner a few blocks away, a place she'd gone to often during her shifts at the hospital. It was quiet, affordable, and familiar, which was exactly what she needed right now. Clara ordered her usual, a cup of coffee and a plain bagel. As she sat by the window, she stared blankly at the people passing by outside. Some hurried along, heads down, while others chatted animatedly with friends. For a moment, she envied their apparent ease, wishing she could trade places with anyone who didn't have to worry about unpaid bills or an uncertain future. Her thoughts were interrupted when a loud crash echoed through the diner. Startled, Clara turned toward the sound and saw a man slumped over at a nearby table, his chair tipping precariously as he collapsed onto the floor. Panic erupted around him. Diners gasped, some stood frozen in shock, while others frantically called for help. Without thinking, Clara sprang into action. Years of training kicked in as she rushed to the man's side. Kneeling beside him, she checked his pulse and breathing. His face was pale and his body limp, but there was still a faint heartbeat. "Call 911, she shouted to no one in particular, her voice cutting through the chaos. Someone nearby fumbled with their phone, dialing emergency services. Clara tilted the man's head back gently to open his airway and began administering CPR. Her movements were steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside her. This wasn't just another patient. It was someone whose life depended entirely on her in that moment. Seconds felt like minutes as Clara worked tirelessly, counting compressions under her breath. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the man coughed weakly, drawing in a shaky breath. Relief washed over Clara as she sat back on her heels, wiping sweat from her forehead. Paramedics arrived shortly after, taking over care and loading the man onto a stretcher. Before they wheeled him out, he opened his eyes briefly and looked at Clara. "Thank you," he managed to whisper hoarsely before slipping back into unconsciousness. Exhausted but relieved, Clara watched them leave, unaware of how much this single act of kindness would change her life forever. As the paramedics wheeled the man out of the diner, Clara stayed behind, her hands trembling slightly from the adrenaline rush. The other diners began to settle back into their seats, murmuring words of gratitude and admiration for what she had done. A few people approached her, thanking her profusely, but Clara barely heard them. Her mind was still focused on the man, his pale face, his weak voice whispering those two simple words, "Thank you." The diner staff brought her a fresh cup of coffee, insisting it was on the house. "You saved his life," the waitress said with a warm smile. "That was incredible." Clara nodded absently, staring at the empty table where the man had been sitting moments before. There was something unsettling about the whole situation, not because of what happened, but because of how it made her feel. She hadn't thought twice about stepping in. It was instinctual, part of who she was as a nurse. But now, without a job or any clear path forward, she couldn't help but wonder why fate had placed her here, in this moment, when she felt like her own life was falling apart. Still, she pushed those thoughts aside. What mattered most was that the man was alive. That was enough for now. Later that evening, as Clara walked home, she replayed the scene in her mind over and over again. She wondered if the man would recover fully, if he had family waiting for him, or if anyone even knew he'd collapsed in a random diner. These questions lingered unanswered, leaving her restless. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to Clara, the man she saved, Adrian Heartfelt was regaining consciousness in the hospital. Adrian wasn't just any patient. He was one of the wealthiest men in the country, known for his vast business empire and charitable contributions. However, he preferred to live quietly, avoiding the spotlight whenever possible. That's why he'd chosen such an unassuming diner for lunch, a rare attempt to escape the pressures of his high-profile life. When Adrian opened his eyes, his personal assistant, Rachel, was by his side. "Sir, you're awake," she exclaimed, visibly relieved. "How are you feeling?" "Tired?" Adrian replied hoarsely, rubbing his temples. "What happened?" Rachel explained that he'd suffered a sudden cardiac episode and nearly died. "But someone saved your life." "A woman named Clara. She performed CPR until the paramedics arrived." Adrian frowned, intrigued. "Clara? Who is she?" "She's a nurse, or at least she used to be," Rachel said, glancing at the notes she'd gathered. "Apparently, she lost her job recently due to budget cuts at the hospital. Still, she didn't hesitate to step in and save you." Adrian fell silent, processing the information. He had always believed in the goodness of humanity, but hearing about Clara's selflessness, especially during such a difficult time in her own life, struck a chord deep within him. Here was someone who, despite losing everything, still found the strength to help a complete stranger. "I want to know more about her," Adrian said finally, his tone firm. "Find out everything you can." Rachel nodded, already pulling out her phone to make calls. By the end of the day, she uncovered not only Clara's name but also details about her struggles, the financial hardships, the modest apartment, and her unwavering dedication to helping others. Adrian listened intently, his respect for Clara growing with each new piece of information. "She deserves more than just my thanks," he said thoughtfully. "Make sure she knows how grateful I am for everything." The next morning, Clara woke up feeling unusually restless. She couldn't shake the memory of the man from the diner, the way he had looked at her before being rushed away, his voice weak but sincere as he whispered his gratitude. It was strange how one brief encounter could linger so heavily in her mind, especially when she had so many other things to worry about. She decided to take a walk to clear her head, wandering aimlessly through her neighborhood. As she passed by a small convenience store, she noticed a newspaper stand with headlines screaming about a billionaire who had recently fallen ill. The name caught her eye, Adrian Heartfelt. Clara froze, staring at the photo accompanying the article. It was him, the man from the diner. Her heart raced as she picked up a copy of the paper and skimmed the story. According to the article, Adrian Heartfelt, one of the richest men in the country, had suffered a medical emergency while dining incognito at a local restaurant. A good Samaritan had saved his life, though no name was mentioned. Clara's hands trembled as she read on. The article described Adrian as a recluse who rarely appeared in public and preferred to keep his personal life private. Despite this, he was known for his generosity, often donating anonymously to causes close to his heart. Could it really be him? Clara wondered. And if so, why hadn't she recognized him earlier? Then again, She hadn't exactly been paying attention to celebrity gossip or billionaire profiles. Her own struggles had consumed all her energy. Back at home, Clara tried to focus on practical matters. Rent was due soon, and she still didn't know how she'd pay it. Selling some of her belongings might help, but that would only buy her a little more time. She sighed, pushing aside the thought of Adrian Heartfelt. What did it matter who he was? He was safe now, and that was all that counted. Unbeknownst to Clara, Adrian was thinking about her too. After learning about her situation, he felt compelled to act. Not out of obligation, but because her kindness resonated deeply with him. In a world where wealth often bred selfishness, Clara reminded him of the true value of compassion and selflessness. That afternoon, Adrian instructed his team to prepare an extraordinary gift for Clara. He wanted it to be meaningful yet subtle enough not to overwhelm her. Luxury cars were delivered to her address under strict confidentiality, along with a handwritten note expressing his gratitude. "This is for you," the note read. "Not because you saved my life, but because your actions remind me of the goodness in humanity. Thank you for being you." Adrian signed the letter simply, "A friend." He hoped the gesture would bring Clara some peace during a challenging time. Little did he know just how much it would change her life. The next morning, Clara woke up to an unusual sight outside her window. First, she thought she was dreaming. For gleaming luxury cars were parked neatly in front of her modest home. 2 sleek black sedans, a silver convertible, and a matte gray SUV. Each car looked like it belonged on the cover of a magazine, not in the driveway of someone like her. Stunned, Clara threw on her robe and stepped outside, half expecting to find some kind of mistake. But as she approached the vehicles, she noticed envelopes tucked under the windshield wipers of each car. Picking one up, she opened it carefully and pulled out a handwritten note. "Dear Clara, I owe you my life, not just because you saved me, but because your selflessness reminded me of what truly matters. These cars are a token of my gratitude, not charity, but a reminder that kindness always comes back around. Please accept them as a gesture of thanks from someone who will never forget what you've done. With gratitude, a friend." Clara's hands trembled as she read the note over and over again. Tears welled up in her eyes, blurring the words on the page. She had no idea how Adrian Heartfelt knew where she lived or why he would go to such lengths to thank her. All she could think about was the overwhelming generosity behind the gesture, and the fact that someone had noticed her when she felt invisible. For a moment, guilt crept in. "I don't deserve this," she whispered to herself. But then she remembered his words. Not charity, but a reminder that kindness always comes back around. Maybe this wasn't just for her. It was a message, a reminder to keep going, even when life felt impossible. Clara sat on the steps of her porch, staring at the cars in disbelief. Neighbors began peeking out of their windows, curious about the commotion. One elderly woman walked over, smiling warmly. "Looks like good things happen to good people," the neighbor said with a wink. Clara laughed through her tears, shaking her head. "I still can't believe it." Later that day, she called a close friend to share the news. "What should I do?" she asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "Keep one and sell the rest," her friend suggested. "You've got bills to pay, right? This could be your fresh start." Clara nodded slowly. It made sense. As much as she wanted to hold onto all 4 cars as symbols of hope, she knew they could provide her with stability, a chance to breathe without constantly worrying about money. By the end of the week, Clara had sold 3 of the cars, using the funds to pay off her debts and secure her financial future. She kept the silver convertible, not because it was flashy, but because it represented something bigger than wealth. Resilience, gratitude, and the belief that goodness exists in the world. With her financial worries eased, Clara felt a weight lift off her shoulders for the first time in months. The luxury car sitting in her driveway wasn't just a gift. It was a symbol of hope and renewal. But more importantly, it reminded her of the power of kindness, both given and received. Determined to pay forward the generosity she'd experienced, Clara began volunteering at a free clinic in her community. Though she no longer had a formal nursing job, she found purpose in helping those who couldn't afford medical care. Her skills were still needed, and her compassion remained unmatched. One day, as she drove the silver convertible to the clinic, she caught herself smiling in the rearview mirror. Life hadn't turned out the way she'd planned, but maybe that was okay. Sometimes, unexpected twists led to beautiful outcomes. At the clinic, patients greeted her warmly, grateful for her presence. Many of them didn't know about the cars or Adrian Hartwell. They only knew Clara as the kind-hearted nurse who always went above and beyond. And that was enough for her. That evening, as she sat on her porch watching the sunset, Clara reflected on everything that had happened. Losing her job had felt like the end of the world, but now she saw it as the beginning of something new. A chapter filled with gratitude, purpose, and second chances. She pulled out Adrian's note and read it one last time before tucking it safely into a drawer. His words echoed in her mind. Kindness always comes back around. Clara smiled softly, knowing he was right. Even in her darkest moments, she had chosen to help someone else. And in doing so, she had unknowingly opened the door to her own brighter future. As the sky turned shades of orange and pink, Clara whispered a quiet thank you to the universe, and to the stranger whose life she had saved. Sometimes all it takes is one act of kindness to change everything.